Welcome to the Wednesday, November 13th meeting of the Mayor and City Council. I'd like to invite the Daughters of the American Revolution to come forward and lead us in the pledge. If we'd all stand and face the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And ladies, before you sit down, I have a proclamation to read that you brought us. It's National American Indian Heritage Month. Whereas the history and culture of our great nation have been significantly influenced by American Indians and indigenous peoples, and whereas the contribution of American Indians have enhanced the freedom, prosperity, and greatness of America today, and whereas their customs and traditions are respected and celebrated as part of a rich legacy throughout the United States, and whereas Native American Awareness Month began in 1976 and recognition was expanded by Congress and approved by President George Bush in August of 1990, designating November as National American Indian Heritage Month, and whereas in honor of National American Indian Heritage Month, community celebrations, as well as numerous cultural, artistic, educational, and historical activities have been planned. Now, therefore, I, Jerry Wood, Mayor of the City of Roswell, do hereby proclaim November 2013 as National American Indian Heritage Month in the City of Roswell and urge all of our citizens to observe this month with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities. And ladies, do y'all have any activities to tell us about for American Indian Heritage Month?
Well, we do get...
Introduce yourselves first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Donna Owens. I'm Regent for the Martha Stewart Bullock chapter. And this is Jill Webster, who's our American Indians chairman for the committee.
And we're very pleased to be here.
During American Indians Heritage Month, you'll find displays at local libraries. You'll find things set up to honor. There's even powwows going on during this month, although we didn't set those up. But you'll find a lot of activities going to recognizing the Native Americans who settled here before we did. We also raise money for the schools because they're the most high at risk group of children there are for suicide and drug and alcohol abuse. So we do activities to raise awareness of it and, of course, to get funds to donate to the schools.
Thank you so much. So I have a hand for the Daughters of the American Revolution. Thank you for coming tonight.
Mayor Woods, you know we can't leave without a picture with the council.
Well, I'm sorry I'm not dressed tonight, but my council would love to join you, and I'll try to hide behind them. If we could join the Daughters of the American Revolution.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, and we'll take one more. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ma'am, here's the proclamation. Thank you.
Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Councilmember Wynn. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Price. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments regarding the consent agenda? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Councilman Orleans, passes unanimously. At this time, I'll call upon Councilmember Rich Dippolito to read the calendar for the Administration and Finance Department.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The first item is approval of an ordinance to amend the city charter related to the Roswell Municipal Court. This is the first reading. Mr. Fischer.
Thank you, Councilmember Dippolito. This is an ordinance to clarify and clean up a little bit in the charter where we have some personnel listed in the charter. We're going to remove the actual titles and positions that we have listed in the charter and basically put in place of that the opportunity for the mayor and council of the city to be able to hire people and positions as necessary to fulfill the duties of court services.
Mr. Davidson, if you'd read the ordinance.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend the charter of the city of Roswell pursuant to OCGA 3635-3 so as to provide for court personnel for the effective operation of the Municipal Court of Roswell and the timely administration of justice, to provide for that authority, to provide for other matters relative thereto, to repeal conflicting laws and ordinances, and for other purposes. Now therefore be it ordained by the mayor and council for the city of Roswell, and is hereby ordained and established by said authority, that the mayor and council hereby adopt the following ordinance, text of which is incorporated herein by reference, and if approved, this will be the first reading.
Now, I understand this isn't affecting the judge's position.
Correct. That's not listed in
Does
here.
the council have any questions? Councilmember Dippolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Fischer, does this change in any way impact the effectiveness or the operation of the court?
It does not, other than it allows for mayor and council or the city to be able to have positions in the court as they deem necessary for the operation of the court.
So it provides additional flexibility?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion? Councilmember Price.
I'm just concerned that we've taken like 4 sections of ordinance and replaced them with one sentence. And that concerns me, that the detail of the operations is totally outside the control of the council. And I just wonder about the wisdom of that, especially if this new group that we're entertaining going with becomes something that we decide is not workable. Will we have to turn the rack back around and reinstate the ordinance, or we'll just worry about that when the time comes?
No, what this does is just takes it out of the charter. We still have full authority over.
You say
court.
the council still has full authority?
Correct, over court services and over the function and over any contract personnel if that when that happens. So what this is doing is just taking some named positions out of the charter.
So the council will still decide what the budget is and what the positions are?
Yes, sir. It doesn't change any of that.
Other questions of council?
I mean, it does, in that it totally potentially eliminates a number of positions, you know, clerk of court, solicitor, marshals, and I know that they will be utilized in another fashion, but I'm concerned that the job descriptions of those entities, you know, are not specified in our charter.
That's correct. It won't be specified in the charter, but we're not eliminating any positions. We're just taking these positions out of the charter, which is the fundamental organization of the city. Personnel, it talks about assistants, it talks about secretaries. That's really not, the charter's not the appropriate place to have those type of personnel listed anyway. We're not eliminating any positions. We're just removing these from the charter and allowing the charter to say you have the flexibility to have positions that you need for the operation of court services.
Other questions? Do we have a motion? Motion by Councilmember Dippolito for approval. Is there a second? Second. Second by Councilmember Wynn. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Seeing no hands up, any further discussion by council? All in favor of the first reading, raise their hands. That's unanimous.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Nancy Diamond, liaison to the Community Development Department.
Thank you, sir. This first item is one in which I have a conflict, so I'm going to recuse myself again.
Kay, will you read that? Present that.
RZ 201301671-1270 Strickland Road, Larry Strickland, land lot 428. This item was deferred from October the 14th, 2013 Mayor and Council meeting. Mr. Townsend.
Yes, this is a proposed conservation subdivision at 1270 Strickland Road. This is an aerial of the property showing Strickland Road and Valley Drive at the southern part, the approximate 5 acres of property with an existing single-family home. The stream is to the north, where most of the trees are located in that location. This is the current zoning map showing the R2 designation of the property. This application is proposed for R2 conservation subdivision. The applicant has reduced it from the 15 originally proposed to 14 single-family lots, minimum of 6,000 square foot lot size, and the proposal includes an approximate 2 acres of conservation on the northern property. This is the original yield plan for the R2 designation, showing that 14 single-family lots meet the minimum criteria for the size of lots for R2 designation. So that's the original yield plan for the R2 zoning. This is the proposed subdivision application design that was submitted for 15 lots at the August 5th, 2013. The applicant then submitted an October 29th proposal, which has 14 lots. This shows 4 lots which are adjacent to a hammerhead now at the western property line for that proposed site development. This is the minimum lot size requirements, showing the reductions in the setback areas along the front, sides, and rears to conform with what's being requested for the 60,000 square foot lots. The Planning Commission recommended denial of the conservation subdivision. Staff also recommended denial of the conservation subdivision. We gave reasons for denial dealing with the R2 designation, the conservation subdivision issues, as well as we felt the existing R2 regulations could be complied with. We are included recommended conditions if Mayor and Council choose to recommend approval, that it be in accordance with the site plan stamped October 29th received, that the number of lots would not be guaranteed, and that a stormwater concept plan would be submitted for this application. If you have any further questions.
Does the council have any questions for staff? Thank you. This time we'll hear from the applicant. Yes, Rich, you had a question.
Thank you. Mr. Townsend, with respect to the original yield plan, does that take into account the 100-year floodplain?
It takes into account just the total area of the property of whether it can break into minimum lot sizes. So it includes all of the 100-year flood and the floodplain.
And how does our ordinance take into account the 100-year floodplain
when determining a yield plan, it is silent as to whether it is included or not included.
Okay, so typically we would include that?
Yes. Typically we would include that acreage as to being allowed to be divided into the minimum lot sizes.
Okay. Could you elaborate a little bit on why you felt that the property was buildable from an R2 zoning standpoint? Or there aren't any obstacles for it being built?
When you look at the yield plan for the R2, the minimum lot sizes are maintained. All of the standard setbacks are maintained. The minimum road widths are maintained. What is being proposed when the conservation subdivision is allowing for the minimum 100-year floodplain to not be encroached upon. There are certain standards and criteria which Public Works Environmental Director can go over as to when you build in that, what are the standards to build within it.
Mm-hmm. Does this plan conform to code for a conservation subdivision?
Yes.
But staff's recommendation is denial even though it conforms with code.
Correct.
And that's because it can be built as
to the
R2?
To the standard R2.
Okay. Now, as part of the criteria for a conservation subdivision, is it because the R2 is not buildable, or is it just an option?
It's an option. The conservation subdivision provides the opportunity to the developer to maintain the floodplain area in a conservation area while maintaining the number of lots that he's allowed to build, asking for smaller lot sizes, smaller setbacks. And in essence, what you're trading is he's not building as much road because he does not have to build it as long. And the proposal area, he does not have to probably, in essence, move as much dirt to build the homes that would be required if he was going to build it in a standard R2 development.
So there's no issue from a code standpoint with this plan, the conservation subdivision as presented?
No.
It's really just which plan is better for the community?
Which plan does the council feel in their deliberation of which fits better into the community? Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Wynn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Townsend, I don't know if you can answer this, or I have to get Mr. Mooring. But on this particular piece of property, since they're not touching the 100-year floodplain, that's going to help with the flooding that we've been hearing from the adjacent neighbors on Alpine. And doing that, and maybe Stu can answer that.
I'll let
question
Stu
for me.
answer that, but I would say that it would be a correct assumption if there's no development or improvements or development take place within the floodplain, then then the issue's not exacerbated by this development taking place.
But if that floodplain is cleared and a traditional R2 is built, then there would be mitigating circumstances of what would have to be done to, I said there's circumstances that would have to be met to ensure that the stormwater did not, I guess I'm talking about best management practices. If they build it as a traditional R2 versus the conservation subdivision, which means that they would encroach in the 100-year floodplain, isn't there circumstances where they would have to mitigate the flow of stormwater because of the disturbance of the floodplain?
Yes, ma'am. They would have pretty extensive requirements to satisfy to mitigate impacts on the floodplain.
Let me rephrase the question so I can understand it.
Okay.
From a stormwater management, is there one of these projects preferable over the other one?
Solely from that standpoint, the conservation subdivision is a better approach.
I wasn't going to ask it directly, but thank you.
The October 29th plan is the preferred stormwater approach.
The October 29th plan being the
14
one that we're
lots.
looking at on the screen.
Correct.
Thank you.
And one other question, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Townsend, then they go from 15 lots down to 14, and the 14 is now in compliance with the density of an
Yes.
R2?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Orleans.
Mr. Townsend, with the reduction in the lots, is the staff still have a recommendation or no recommendation? I know your original one was based on what was submitted before.
Staff could recommend approval of the conservation subdivision.
So now you would recommend approval of the most recent site plan?
Correct.
Thank you.
Other questions for staff? Councilmember Eichelhardt.
From the previous comments, one of the weaknesses of the subdivision conservation subdivision is that it doesn't necessarily take into effect those things that couldn't be built on. So in your yield plan, yes, you'd make that number, but that doesn't mean that you could actually build based on what you just said on the floodplain. You can't just go in and clear that regardless of it being there. You have to do a number of things to make that even be possible. So in reality, you probably couldn't build 14 on that piece of property based on that, or the cost to do that would be extremely high. But don't know if you could do that. So, I guess it's maybe a subjective question, but if you did build R2, would you agree that you actually could build 14 lots on that property?
You would still have to deal with your stormwater mitigation. There would probably be extra cost related to what type of fill, what type of drainage, what type of detention areas related to would have to take place for those 14 lots.
Because I think that's a miscalculation that's allowed in the ordinance that doesn't take into account what really couldn't be built on anyway.
Right.
And that was one of the intentions of the conservation subdivision is, you get credit if you save something, but if you couldn't have built on it anyway, it really doesn't make sense to give you extra credit for that, which is ultimately what happens.
But the way it was originally drafted, it gives you that credit.
I know, that's why I said it's a weakness in the ordinance, which
Right.
we haven't allowed moving forward. But I think Mr. Moore was going to...
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, last time there was discussion about that they would have to balance any filling and so forth, and it goes beyond that. There would have to be, floodwater modeling of Hogwalla Creek and we know of some downstream flooding issues with that and so forth. So it would have to be some sophisticated modeling work done to determine how they could actually fulfill that yield plan. Just based on the physical amount of property, yeah, they could get 14 lots.
And it's not simple cut and fill or some other
Correct.
things that they can just go in and
That's
clear.
right.
So that needs to be recognized as we consider what can and can't actually be done. Two other questions then on, and it doesn't really show on this 1029 plan, but it shows the secondary conservation areas, which are defined as still having value, but on one of the previous ones there was going to be a detention pond in there, or detention area. I'm not sure if that shows up on here. Would that actually then count as a secondary conservation area?
The detention pond?
Well, there was some discussion about, and that's where I'm not sure it's on this plan.
We'll let the
Previous
applicant
things.
represent.
Okay. All right. All right, that's good for now then.
Councilmember Dippolito.
Mr. Moore, before you go, this may not be a question you can answer with your knowledge of the property, but you were talking about downstream issues. Is there a possibility that this conservation area, that things can be done to this conservation area to help the downstream conditions? And I recognize you may not have enough information to answer the question, but just off the top of your head, is there?
Possibly, considering the size and scope of the property, I don't think it would have significant impact on the flood elevation of Hogwalla Creek. As it is proposed, it's not a negative impact, but it's not a positive impact either.
Right. I was wondering if there are ways to turn it into a positive, but it may be challenging.
There probably would be, but I just considering the scale of it, I don't think it would be a major positive impact.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Eichelhardt.
One other that changes the thought. It may actually be a question for Mr. Davidson. But if when the lot size is being reduced, will that set a precedent for other lots around it to say, well, now we have the 6,000 to 8,000 square foot lots across the street, so the existing R2 could then be used as, this is a reason to go below that in the future?
You can direct that to your legal counsel.
No, it won't set a precedent, because if you do approve this as a conservation subdivision, that's exactly what it's intended for, is the smaller lots in order to get the bigger conservation area.
I understand that, but is that...
But it doesn't set a precedent as far as R2 anywhere else in the surrounding area.
No, I understand that, but the next rezoning, to somebody come in and cross the streets from these and say, well, we need the 6,000 to 8,000 square foot lot based on what's now across the street.
No, because it's designated as a conservation subdivision. It wouldn't just be an R2, it's designated as a conservation subdivision. So there would be no entitlement unless they came in as a conservation subdivision also.
Okay, thanks.
Does the council have any other questions for staff? Councilmember Price.
Yes, probably this may be for Stu. I know that some surrounding neighbors to the west have some ongoing water collection issues in their yards. Whether or not the conservation area is approved, prior to any building, what will be required of this entity to not exacerbate their current condition?
They would need to present plans, more extensive than what's shown here, that demonstrates what their plans are for stormwater management on the site. This is just essentially showing what their lot layout would be. Based on this plan, it appears that it would not have any negative impact on flooding in the stream, but they would have to manage on-site stormwater, among other things.
Has any analysis of the runoff into, and I can't read the number of the lot, but the one just immediately to the left of the loop, for instance, in that lot, do we know where waters from this property are draining to as affects that property, or the ones in front of it towards the street?
Not from the information that's submitted. I mean, generally, obviously, it's going to drain towards the creek. I think I mean, that's not part of the plan that they've submitted at this stage. This is more or less the zoning stage. If this was approved, then they would need to develop full-scale construction plans and demonstrate how they were going to collect and distribute the drainage. So it's not conclusive at this point.
So we should have every confidence that whatever's built in whatever configuration will not adversely affect those properties to the west as far as drainage, since they already have a problem?
Our focus is on how it impacts the stormwater system. What takes place between properties is typically reviewed, and David Davidson could comment more on that, but typically that is not a part of our purview. Obviously, we don't want to approve a plan that is clearly going to create an issue for surrounding property. So there are regulations.
Yeah, that's really kind of my question, is how do we ensure that we aren't creating a problem somewhere with the development of this land where it's already very low-lying and neighbors are already having a problem?
Yeah, and essentially that's the impact, that's the intent of the regulations that have been developed by the Metropolitan Water Management District for stormwater. Those rules are intended to avoid or mitigate any impact that a given development has on existing property. But as far as a specific issue, that's not necessarily, I mean, if it's something that we can discern, but, and I think probably David may be better to comment on that.
Well, I think what you're asking, they can only do what they can do on their site, and we can only regulate what's going on their site. So if there's a problem out there now, we can't make them fix something that their site can't really control. We just make sure that anything that can be done will be done on that site, and that's what the engineering analysis will do. But we can't make them go upstream off their property or downstream to fix things that aren't even on their property.
No, I'm just asking about the pattern of the stormwater runoff currently, and after this is developed in whatever configuration, are there assurances that those properties to the west will be not adversely affected?
Well, we have, post-development.
The post-development stormwater regulations regulate the activity and the impact of it on, so that the rate of runoff from a piece of property is no more after development than it was prior to development, that the water quality impact is mitigated by appropriate storage or other techniques, and that the flow rates and such are not increased to the point of jeopardizing channels and so forth.
So the answer is yes, there are assurances.
Okay, my next question then is, if this conservation arrangement is not approved and it were developed the entire property, what would be required for the buildup of the land adjacent to the stream? By the same token, would that be presumed not to adversely affect those properties upstream?
They would have to meet the same criteria, the same regulations under either development plan.
And not to put you on the spot, but to bring that land on the upper portion of the site plan up to buildable condition, what would that approximately cost to get the whatever was required, studies and actual implementation and review?
I don't have a sense for that at all.
I mean, does anybody have an idea? Is this like 100,000, 500,000, 10,000?
For the design work or for the construction?
Just the whole thing, to get that up to buildable. In other words, is it cost effective for that to happen, for them to actually build on that land 4 or 5 houses?
That's something that
I mean,
the
it's pretty-
property
I know
owner
it's
has
pretty
to
subjective,
determine.
But, we're up here trying to figure out, is this a conservation easement of convenience, or is this a conservation easement that will be a hardship in a sense that they're giving it up, or are they giving up something that's not worth anything?
To mitigate impact in the floodplain would be an expensive design process and an expensive construction process. I offhand can't put that into parameters, but it's hard to imagine that those lots would be cost effectively developed for residential property.
Thank you.
Does council have any other questions? This time we'll hear from the applicant.
Good evening, council members. Shane Roach with Brightwater Homes, who we've met here once or twice before. Thank you, first of all, to staff and everyone through the discussion that was just had. In the interest of not rehashing some of those things, I think I might jump right to some of the questions that have been proposed. I want to start by pointing out that there are a number of reasons for a conservation subdivision. Among those, and some of those that we've tried to point out along the way, minimizing the environmental and visual impacts of new development on critical resources and providing for undivided or relatively undivided open spaces within the new development, creating more attractive and pleasing living environment than possible with conventional house lot and street development, fostering informal social interaction among neighbors within the community, reducing the demand on public expenditures. This in particular talks about open space and parkland. Built-in compact patterns that reduce capital costs by requiring less linear front footage for streets. Meet the design requirements and guidelines for protection of the conservation area, and then ultimately are permitted by right, so that conservation subdivisions are no more difficult to gain approval than others. So with those things listed, the features that we see as a part of this conservation subdivision as really beneficial to this site, to the neighbors, and to ultimately our residents that we see moving in here. We believe that this open space that's being proposed is a really important part of community design. And I know that you all have had some level of conversation in this regard, and the way that you've looked at much of what's being discussed for UDC, among other things, different progressive developments along the way, where they've taken open space and making that an important part of the community experience. This is a very important part of what we've been proposing all along for this site. For those of you who have physically been on this site, it's a very natural progression to see the way the site lays today, to understand that at the northern part of the property, heavily wooded, lots of native species, lots of native plants. A portion of this is flood zone. And there's a natural area that can be preserved through this conservation approach. We've looked at this multiple different ways. We've talked to neighbors. We've understood what the concerns are. And the concerns that come along are largely related to flooding. You've heard from the folks on Alpine Drive. I've spoken with some of those folks in person about what flooding has occurred in the past few years for them. And then they have yards that back to this conservation area. So we look at the conservation area as a place that can preserve the natural state of which it is, over 100 trees, 27 specimen trees, provide an open community space, walking trails for our neighbors and for the nearby neighbors on Strickland Road and Valley Drive. And it gives us the ability to go in to some of the things that have been suggested to us and restore the habitat to something that's better than what's there today. So the floodplain area, the conservation area that we're looking at today, a number of native species that are in there working to thrive, a lot of cool things that have gone in, plants, sunflowers, fern species, hardwoods, all those things that we'll be able to protect through the conservation approach. Not only that, but going in there with a walking trail, making this a feature of the neighborhood is a really important element of what we're trying to accomplish with the conservation subdivision. Moreover, in the typical R2, there is no ability for this open space. There's no ability for us to maximize the use of the land and provide open space. We will have to develop every portion that we can. There's been some discussion about floodplain and whether or not we would try to make the whole thing buildable. We would never try to make the whole thing buildable. However, with the floodplain that exists today, in a typical R2, we would have homes right up at the edge of the floodplain, and we would be in the floodplain creating yard spaces, creating areas that our residents would expect if those were a part of their homes and their home sites. So backing all that up, we come to this site, we see the natural lay of the land and an opportunity to preserve this conservation area as a feature for the residents. I want to add that neighbors across the street and nearby on Valley Drive, we've met with them a number of times. Some of the things that we have made in concessions from the previous plan are the number of lots. So we go from the 14 lot yield plan at R2. We have remained at the 14 lots with the R2 conservation site plan. We have offered to remove the connection to Valley Drive from our previous plan. This was in a sensitivity to the neighbors that are across the street on Valley Drive, and we're concerned about traffic and cars and headlights and things of that nature that might have been introduced by that connection. We've also revised slightly setbacks to 20 feet for front setbacks on this site, which allows us 33 feet from the curb. And the reason that's important is because we've had people ask about cars and parking and where do your visitors stay. These homes will have driveways that are sufficient for visitor parking, that are sufficient for cars to be parked and neighbors to still walk through the sidewalks in the city streets. I had a whole host of things prepared to say, and you guys have answered a lot of those questions through your conversation, so I appreciate that greatly. I'd ask if there are any questions that I haven't responded to or information that I can share about what our intent is here.
Does the council have any questions? Councilmember Dippolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Roach, can you talk a little bit about the architecture? Do you have any visuals of what the houses would look like?
I can. I will show you a couple of images that come to mind for us. I'm going to start by saying we don't have individual specific homes designed for this site yet. We're working through getting the site plan that will be our final before we work with that.
So your company doesn't have stock plans, you work per...
We do. So what I'd like to show you are a couple of homes that we're building in Park East, which you may or may not have had a chance to visit. We've invited neighbors and residents to do that. This is an example of a home in Park East today that would have a similar massing as what we would do on the Strickland Road site. You can see this home is 2-story, front porch. The difference between this home and what you would see in Strickland is this secondary portion of the house would be the garage. In this particular house, we have a garage in the rear, so I want to be very clear about what I'm showing you.
And how far back from the face of the house would the garage be set?
So in any condition, we will have our garages set behind front porch architecture. So in the conversations that we've had in the past, we would be 8 to 10 feet from front of house, the front step into a porch condition before we get to garage. Main massing of the house will be similar. So main massing of the house and the garage, slight offset, if any, but we generally are putting a couple of feet offset there. But then when you add the depth of the porch, you get another 6 to 8 to 10 feet depth of porch, such that the garage sits back even further from the buildable area of the lot. Does that answer your question?
It does, and the reason I'm asking it is one of the things we're starting to ask builders to do is make sure the garage is set back. We typically like to see 5 feet, and a lot of that is because you never know if there's going to be an actual porch there or not.
Right.
If there is a porch, then obviously that makes even 2 feet seem a lot deeper than that.
Right.
But we like to have some sort of relief there so it doesn't feel like the garage is right up on top of the front of the house.
I think we'd be very comfortable with some distance specified from the setback because we will use that area for porches. But as it relates to the plane of the house, 5, 6, 8 feet will be more than we can accomplish on the site as it exists today from the plane of the house. Not from the porch, but from the plane of the house.
So you're saying 5 feet would be too much?
5 feet from the main plane of the house would be. From the setback, 5 feet will be easily accomplished.
Well, it's going to have to be a lot more than that because you're saying you're going to have room for a car, so it's got to be at least 20 feet. I'm sorry, what is the setback from?
From the building setback, it's 20 feet from the right-of-way.
Okay, so
20 feet, so we'll be 33 feet from the curb, 20 feet to the build line, porch depth, and then house and garage.
Okay, so you would have 25 feet is what you're saying, which would be sufficient for a car.
From property line, yes, sir.
All right, so this gives a sense of the type of house that you'd be expecting to build there.
It does.
Do you have other examples?
Yeah, I have an example, not of our homes, but of another subdivision that you may be familiar with, Vickery in Forsyth County. Forgive me, that's not showing up very well, but in this condition, you see houses that are even closer. These are smaller setbacks than what we've proposed today, but this can give an example of proximity of homes to one another, as well as an even narrower condition at the front of the street. You can see cars parked here. You can see the depth of this garage perhaps, and if not, I can pass this around, a little dark to see from our screen. But that there is sufficient room for parking. There is sufficient room for that garage to feel set back from the front of the home. And porch architecture will be our method for doing that.
Wouldn't it benefit you to bring the plane of the house closer to the street while maintaining the garage setback? So you have enough room for a car, but you bring that plane closer. I would think you'd have more buildable area on your lot and smaller front yard.
Yes, if I understand your question, we will push all the way to the front of the building setback with porch architecture. And then behind that will be main house massing and garage.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions for the applicant? Councilmember Eigelhart.
Thank you. Looking at, if you did develop this as a standard R2, not with the conservation, are you saying that you actually could build houses in that top right corner that is both within the floodplain and in the impervious setbacks?
Yeah, can you flip back to that yield plan perhaps? Sorry. So important to point out that while lots and lot lines will still be in floodplain area, it would never be as if we're trying to make the entire site buildable. We would only need the buildable area up at the front of these lots where the home can be. The remainder of that rear area would be yard, can remain floodplain elevation, all of those things. Now, the discussion that's being had is, it'll take some work. You know, it will take very careful planning for us to do this in an R2 configuration with the floodplain. There's no doubt about it. But what we don't get is we don't get the open space, and we don't get the ability to keep that floodplain as a natural buffer for residents nearby and for the residents of our own. Those will become yard area. They will, by necessity, they will need to be cleared in a much greater fashion than they would in our conservation approach.
All right, I guess we disagree on what you could do and what is actually affordable to be able to do. Then moving to the conservation plan you've got on the other existing 29th plan. Have we said, or I know there's been conversation, but who was going to own the conservation area? Would it?
HOA.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then on the plan itself, are all these homes fronting the new road?
Yes.
So particularly 1 through 5, their backs would be to Valley?
They are, and important for me to say that we're going to be extremely sensitive to the architecture at Valley Drive in terms of making that pretty, you know, aesthetically pleasing for the neighbors, of course, but also for us. You know, we can't come in and build homes, or it's been our experience, you come in and build homes and the first thing people see are the ugly backs of a home. It's not appealing. It's not a saleable product. So yes, we will ultimately have the homes feel as if they're facing the internal street, but the architecture on both sides critical for us as well as the neighbors.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Councilmember Price.
In terms of, and I know you're not asking for a variance or anything, but in terms of the surrounding houses, lot size, density, what have you, is this conform with that, or is this different?
I'm sorry, does this conform with the houses next door?
To
Properties
the north,
next door?
well, obviously to the east is business, but to the north, west, and south.
Yeah, so to the west you have R2. To the north, across the creek, ultimately, you have R1. And to the south, you have R2. And then, of course, you can see we're adjacent to commercial and industrial. And I have some really lovely pictures of what that is, just to share what the challenges for the site will be for us in terms of you know, overcoming some objections. But yes.
So I guess my question also is, without with the conservation easement, or say you took off the upper third of the property, like where what would be the conservation, if that went away, weren't part of the property, according to current R2, would you be able to build at that setback and lot size without the conservation easement?
R2, could we build R2 in the lower?
Maybe Brad needs to answer that, because I thought, based on what was said at previous meetings, I'm getting a different answer tonight, or I'm sensing a different answer. Does it conform to R2 without the upper third?
No, we would need that. We would need the upper third for lot area.
Okay, so
it has to count as lot area.
Okay. So then really the density of what the surrounding neighbors will see really is not what a normal R2 would be.
Site yields 14 lots today by the definition of a yield plan.
No, but that's including the upper, what I'll call unbuildable.
Okay.
I'll just say that. I mean, you can build it, but it's going to be cost prohibitive, it sounds like. So if that upper portion could not be built on, or is not going to be built on, could the remaining lots be there, according to R2?
No, we need the entire acreage for R2. And my business partner just pointed out that the number of homes along Valley Drive today, as you can see, there are 4 lots facing Valley Drive. On the south side of Valley Drive, I think you can probably visually anticipate that 4th lot could be split pretty easily into 2 more lots. So as you look at R2 in existence today on Valley Drive, there is space for 5 homes to face Valley Drive. We're proposing 6. So as it relates to what the street might look like in relation to the neighbors, we're only proposing, in that particular instance, 1 more home along Valley Drive than would be available by R2.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Does the council have any other questions? Councilmember Dippolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's, the residents are concerned about property values and how this might impact them. And I think for their knowledge, do you have a sense of what price point you're looking to build these? It looks like from the architecture that's significant.
It is. So we have all along maintained that we think this will be a mid-400s price point, low to mid-400s, which is relative to surrounding property values significantly higher. And I would share that our experience has been that as those transitions occur, you know, the rising tide floats many boats. So we certainly see that bringing new homes in here at a higher value over time should prove to be beneficial to neighbors. But we are proposing a $400,000 price point.
So even though the lots are half the size, you think you can yield a very good product on that?
I do, and one of the most important reasons I can state is conservation area, is open space, is the feel that you get from a neighborhood like a Vickery or a Woodstock downtown, where they've preserved open spaces and made them an important part of that development. Values increased fairly dramatically.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. You'll have an opportunity for rebuttal after we have public comment.
Thank you.
This time, if you'd like to speak either for or against, or have any questions on this project, we'll hear from you. We have a 5-minute time limit. Come forward if you'll give us your name and address, please. If you do wish to speak, I'd like you to move to the front so we take less time walking forward for future folks speaking.
Hi, I'm Beth Kirk, and I'm one of the neighbors that Mr. Roach talked about that lives directly across the street from the project. And I have talked with him a good bit, and of course, our ideal situation would be to leave that an open field from now on, but I know it's not going to happen. So I think the project that he's putting in there, I don't object to it. I think we could have something worse than another residential area go in there. So the residential area is okay. But, and he also asked me what we would do if he had the conservational area there. My husband and I do walk all the time, and if the conservation area is approved, we would probably use it, and I think some of the other neighbors would too. And my main concern is the traffic, is the congestion, trying to get back out into Highway 9, because we do have problems now, and hopefully someday we can get a street light or traffic light out in that area. So we don't oppose the situation and do approve more of the conservation.
Thank you. Who'd like to speak next? Yes, sir. Come forward. Give us your name and address, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Lars Lind. I live at 205 Alpine, adjacent to this proposed development. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the time to talk, and council members, thank you. I have a few words that I've thought about here. The developer's plan requires an R2 conservation and allows for a 5-foot setback on the sides instead of the design of an R2 requirement, which starts talking at about 35-foot setback. 5 foot allows me to watch my neighbor make coffee in his kitchen. And to give a floodplain set aside, maybe it's already set aside by the city code. Where's the conservation acreage if you ignore the floodplain area that can't be built on anyway viably? Is he donating? I think he said that he's not. The floodplain probably is not allowed to have any fill, as a creek will be naturally fighting to regain its natural path. So again, filling that, as was brought up, might not be a viable option. My house is just feet from the 100-year floodplain, and if it was inside the floodplain, I would have been flooded out a few times already in the past 10 years. Any backup on the creek would affect and impact my home, and I'm not happy with that. The other thing that's obvious is that a T-type cul-de-sac, as the developer proposes, doesn't give enough school bus turnaround space, making the kids and their moms walk to the end of the development or leave the kids exposed. Think about the moms in wintertime. There are many large specimen trees on the side of the property. I think that's the west side. And those are not being discussed as a conservation area, but probably should be. Replacing a 100-year-old tree doesn't mean replacing it with 25-year-old trees. This is a property rights state, and R2 is set up to protect the nearest properties from water runoff from this development. Is that in the plan? That's my open question. R2 conservation only helps defeat the requirements of R2. R2 conservation probably requires a UDC code revision to the existing R2. Changes to the existing R2 provides a legal precedent to future development. What about the precedent if the developer on Hambury, which we know was assisting in solving some of the problems there with water, and he agreed to do that? Maybe we could look at that possibility with this developer. The codes basically want nothing worse from future developments, and I would welcome anybody to give me a question if they would like. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone else wish to speak? Yes, come forward, please. Give us your name and address.
Good evening. My name is Maria Oliveira. I live at 1285 Valley Court in Roswell. Well, I've been to pretty much most of the council meetings and meetings beforehand. I'd like to point out a few things. I did meet up with the water engineer today. I think the name is, let's see, I met with Danielle Alloway as well as with Stu Morning. Try to get a little more insight on the water issue that's concerning on my property. If we can please show the, can I have this area working, please? Okay. I know when the applicant shows an R2, it's an R2 based off of 5 acres, and it's a clean piece of paper. 5 acres here, this lot actually has a character. There's actually a lot of density of critical rooted trees here, species trees, and I know he's got the concerns, or the applicant has the concerns on basically the 1/3 of the property, which is floodplain, but there really isn't any regard for keeping, what's the word? The visual impact of wiping all of this out, and the density, and like I said, the visual impact and how it's going to better impact the community. So I have a question on how would that impact the community if your plan is to remove all of these trees, and also its critical root structure, which prevents increased soil erosion. If you notice these 2 points that are in blue, those are the catch basins. What's happening, there is water that, of course, water flows downstream, and it flows downhill. There is substantial grading onto the property, and it goes down. When it goes down, the neighboring properties, things settle down to the bottom. That being said, my backyard is looking like this. This is not what it looked like when I purchased my property 15 years ago. And it's basically happening now at more rainstorms. So it's not very appealing. So I don't see how that could be a property value, an added property value to prospective buyers in the future. So one of my other questions would be to the applicant is, or actually to the council, since there's water coming in from within the property line, who is, and it's damaging my property, who is responsible for fixing it today? When will it get fixed? And once there is construction that goes on, how do we prevent from more damage to incur? Also, one last item, the applicant submitted a, let's see, a new site plan, October 29th, correct? I just saw that recently. And you see that there's a primary conservation area and the secondary conservation area, but really that conservation area is a maintenance location. It's mandatory, it's required, they're going to need it anyway, regardless of the number of homes.
There was a request that you speak into the microphone, thank you.
Okay. I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry. There is a request, it looks like there's a secondary conservation area, but really there needs to be an area set aside for maintenance. So that's not really considered a conservation area, it's a required maintenance area that's going to be needed, whether it's whatever number of homes that there'll be. There needs to be a spot allotted for that, and they cannot do it or should not do it in the 100 flood year plain. Therefore, it would make, and they also have a very small little tiny triangle, and that's considered their other portion of their secondary conservation area. So it makes sense, more of a logical aspect, to potentially make this area in here, a portion of that, as a secondary conservation area. This way you maintain the critical root structure, you prevent more soil erosion, and hopefully we won't have any more worse problems than what we have now. Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to speak next? Yes, sir, come forward. You give us your name and address, please.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, and staff, meeting room, staff people. I live at 12, my name is Jeff Purvis. I live at 1275 Valley Court. I've been living there 48 years plus. I've enjoyed looking over that Strickland property from my backyard. Looks real good. But of course, in the last 30 years, I've expected that property to be developed. I don't mind people developing, but as long as it does not hurt the value of property around it. And this is not the best it could be used for, since I didn't buy it. And it's not the worst. It could be like the Rusty Bucket up there on Strickland, or it could be like the city dump down at 1280 Valley Court that we have. I'm not against people developing their own property like that. So this is about the third time they've been here, and it looks like it's a little bit better than what they have had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone else wish to speak? Yes, sir, come forward. Give us your name and address, please.
It's Eric Schumacher, 145 Prospect Street. I'd just like to ask if the council has read my opposition letter. Should have arrived in the packet. So I understand that we've had a reduction in the number of homes from previous plans. But I'm still concerned about what this subdivision is going to look like in this neighborhood. I asked the applicant in the original community meeting if they could produce some art for this, just so we can see what this is going to look like from an elevation standpoint. And they said at that time they didn't have that, and we've had some delays. And I think it's only proper to really try to visualize what this is going to look like in the neighborhood, especially since we've changed to rear-facing valley. I'm concerned that this area is going to look like one building when you come into this neighborhood. The neighborhood is obviously R2. We have some nice large lots. This is going to look very, very dense. And while we do have the suggestion of a conservation subdivision, conservation area that's going to be a park-like atmosphere, it is down the hill. It's not really going to benefit any of our neighbors and any of the public in any way from a visual standpoint. In fact, we're going to get a deterioration of a park-like atmosphere in this neighborhood by having this kind of density in this area. We're not even going to see it. We can see it today, but we're not going to be able to see it with this kind of construction. Further, the secondary conservation area is being suggested that it'll be a detention pond and maybe an open detention pond. So in that way, we're not going to get any additional benefit to the residents or anybody in this neighborhood or the public, because that will be, I guess, could be a swimming pond, I suppose, but it's a probably a detention area. Now, we've seen pictures of Tina's backyard where we've got some percolation issues and some water. Now, I would say that this primary conservation area is not going to have a lot of use. It's going to be a lot of mud and water, so I'm not really seeing a benefit to the other residents in the area or the public, other than we may not be disturbing the area for floodplain and for stormwater and the trees. I would really like to see this developer try to do the same type of thing with fewer homes, so that we can have more respectable setbacks on the sides, have a more park-like atmosphere, which is really the true intent of having the conservation subdivision, so that we have a park-like atmosphere, and I don't think this is really achieving that at all. Further, I know that we've arrived at a T-type configuration for the road. I know that one of the neighbors was opposed to having a cut through here, but if the city is going to accept this road as, for their responsibility, I'd like to see us have some additional connectivity here so we can have more flow. Could be for emergency vehicles, etc. If we stay with this T, I'd like to see us suggest that this might be a private drive owned by the HOA along with the conservation area. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Does anyone else wish to speak? Seeing no hands up, I'll give the applicant an opportunity to respond.
Thank you. I'll just reiterate, we firmly believe that this conservation area is going to be a nice open space available for our residents. We've seen it in many other places. It proves to be a valuable asset to nearby neighbors, community, a pleasant experience. It's something that can't be accomplished through the typical R2 site plan. I think that's all I would add.
Just a question regarding the accessibility of this conservation area. Is there anything in the zoning which requires us to be open to the public?
While they're reviewing,
I think the conservation regulations really determine the council making the decision whether it's appropriate or not. If they want it open to the public, then the council needs the responsibility. The city takes it. If they want it to be private, it remains to the HOA, to their cost and expense on their tax bill.
Well, there would be the possibility of a conservation easement being granted to the city and a easement for the public without the city taking over ownership.
So
that is a possibility.
So you're indicating that the public or the conservation area should have a public access to it.
Well, the applicant has told me that this is going to be open and accessible to the neighborhood. I don't envision folks traveling from Martin's Landing to this neighborhood to walk in this neighborhood, but I can imagine the adjacent neighborhoods walking it. But I was wondering, other than the statement tonight, is there something in the plans that assure that this conservation easement becomes accessible to the neighborhood?
There is current public road of Strickland that would connect to it, as well as the proposed road is public, which connects to the conservation area.
Was there anything in the applicant can tell me that assurances to the neighborhood that this would be open?
Yeah, so in this site plan that we have generated, of course, the public road and the access to the area here, we've also made an important connection for us, and to respond to your question, that the sidewalk would connect to this walking area. We've shown a connection in two locations, here at the northeast corner of the property and here at the south side of the property, such that we would connect public sidewalk with public sidewalk all the way to conservation area in two locations connecting to the proposed walking trail in the area.
Well, are the homeowners association covenants going to address this?
It sounds like they will need to, yes.
I don't know if you'll need to or not, but I'm just saying that if you're representing that this is going to be accessible to the neighborhood, it would give me more assurances if I was voting, and I will not be because it's a 3, it will not be a tie.
Yes.
But that would be a factor.
Yes, sir. We would make sure that the HOA covenants protect the accessibility of this area to nearby neighbors.
Does the council have any questions for the applicant? Councilmember Dippolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions that were raised. I believe Mr. Oliveira had asked about stormwater and the impact, the potential impact to her property, which is already being significantly impacted. What assurances do you have that your design will not negatively impact her property next door? And how do you foresee that being protected?
Yeah. I won't pretend to know what's putting the water there today, other than to point out that her property in this area, as you can see, floodplain line. So the area of pictures that have been shown over and over again are indeed floodplain on her property. So at this point in time, I can only assume that that's showing water in the way that the floodplain is behaving in that area. I would also point out that that is upstream of our property. Ultimately, the creek flows in this direction, and so we're working towards a site that no matter how it's developed, 1 house, 14 houses, 30 houses on this, to the point of the requirements required by development, we have to protect what it is that we develop through all the requirements and restrictions and guidelines that are put forth today for any development, no matter how it would be developed on this property.
Where is your stormwater flowing to?
Our stormwater will be into a couple of detention areas, and to the point raised earlier, preliminary plan. The preliminary plan would include underground detention in this area of the street, and likely surface detention in this area of the site.
Okay, so that's secondary conservation area will be detention?
Yes.
Will that be a pond with a chain link fence around it, or is it more shallow than that?
Yeah, relatively shallow, and everything that we have seen in preliminary design so far would be a low wall in the back area, but natural grade into the area. So there would be a structure of sorts designed in here, ultimately in the final plan, to provide for that surface detention. But it would be it would be at grade and into the detention area on the south side.
Okay, but it will still require fencing around it. There's no way to do that where it's more of a natural bioswale type?
There may be. Again, in preliminary design, we know that this area will need surface detention. Whether it needs a wall or whether it can be done through a berm, I think remains to be proven in the final design. But we do know that we'll have surface detention in this area.
Okay. The other question that she raised was about specimen trees, and typically I thought we had a tree safe plan in our packet, and I didn't see one here. Do we typically have one for zoning?
We have provided a recompense plan in the original package, and of course, through the conservation proposal, all of this would exist ultimately as tree safe. The area that is here has been pointed out. There certainly are trees on the site that will have to come down for development, again, regardless of the approach we take.
But some of those trees are right on the property line. Do you foresee grading right to the property line?
I don't. I will state that the trees, especially through here on the property line, are of equal importance to us, likely, as they are to the neighbors adjacent to us. In the same way that there's an advantage for us to leave as much buffer as we can for our neighbors, we'll do so. I can't stand here today and say that all of them will be protected, but I can stand here today and say that we are equally interested in preserving the trees along this area to the extent possible. Now, it's been pointed out that there is a curb inlet here today that's just open flowing on the property. My suspicion is that when we get into a full-blown stormwater plan as we proceed, we've got to do something about that water. We've got to do something about carrying that water where it needs to go. And it is in this treat area. So inevitably there will be some development required, some tree removal required to address that, I believe.
Okay. I would like to see that recompense plan in a minute after I ask my last question, which is actually it's kind of a two-part question, which you've started getting into with respect to the conservation area. And I think that's obviously a critical piece of this. And you talked about the importance of preserving the trees and the natural foliage, which I think is important. But who is going to maintain this conservation area in the future? And a lot of it's natural and it's going to be impacted by the stream, but there will be a path through here. Somebody's got to maintain that. If some of this does get damaged through flooding, there's going to need to be some sort of restoration. How do we make sure that this becomes a viable conservation area into the future and not just a area that's flooded out and frankly could be an eyesore.
Right. So the area today, it is very pretty. You know, I've walked it many times. It's a nice natural area. There are going to be moments when it floods. Likely, it's floodplain area. The trail that we've proposed would be a bark mulch trail. You know, so we're not proposing anything in there that would be structure that might be damaged through the occasional floodwater that comes through. But as it exists today, good soil, good plant growth, healthy native species in there, heavily overgrown with invasive species. So part of our plan in this area is to go and remove the invasive species. As we look at what this conservation area would really end up being for us, the bark mulch trail throughout, but also a specific focus on restoration of native plant species and removal of the invasive species. So in that regard, our HOA covenants would include the intent for that to be a managed native plant species area, and with some focus on keeping invasive species out of there. So I think maybe to answer your question specifically, covenants written in a way that would put an emphasis on the native plant species, on keeping the invasive species out, and maintaining the bark mulch trail in a manner that's usable for the neighbors and presumably nearby neighbors as well.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Councilmember Eichelhard.
Just along those lines, if it does flood, which it's likely to do, it's what it's for, would that not take out the bark mulch regularly?
It may. I can only tell you how long I've seen the property with my own eyes, and we certainly haven't had any floodwater on the property in the last several months. I know that over the years they have. So I would suggest through experience and through the stories that I've heard from others, there is an occasional flood. You know, it's going to happen at some point in the future. I can't pretend to know what the impact on that bark mulch trail will be. However, I do know that using a surface like bark mulch makes it relatively easy to repair and makes it low impact in the event that there is floodwater in the area at some point in time in the future.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This time, we'll entertain any comments the council would like to make before we have a motion. Councilmember Dippolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did have a question about that recompense plan. Do we have that?
There was one originally submitted with the original plan that was not an amended one for this original, or for this application. So we have the original recompense plan that shows.
Mr. Townsend, I think there's one. Oh, he has one.
If I may. That's the right one, Brad, Jackie?
I think that's the tree planting plan.
The recompense.
Okay, the recompense is on that side.
In this chart.
Right.
Very small.
Yeah.
But recompense as it relates to tree plan and as it relates to trees that were
For 15 lots.
and will be taken off. That's right, for 15 lots. So we've reduced to 14, but I expect the tree recompense to remain similar in the fact that we're still removing the same number of trees from the site as we would with 15 lots.
And how many specimen trees are we removing?
14 will be removed from this area, 27 preserved in the conservation area.
Okay, and I don't see the ones on the west property line.
They are not shown in this plan. We would have to go back to another tree plan to show you. But we would ultimately be recompensing the trees that are removed from this area of the site, and a very few out in the middle of the site.
So there probably are additional trees along that west property line that may be impacted.
There will inevitably be some trees along this property line that will be impacted. Again, if for no other reason, for the purposes of the stormwater that's dumping out onto the site today from the curb inlet that will need to be picked up and addressed.
Question for staff. When the plan comes in for recompense, if he is hopeful and optimistic to save several of those trees on the west property line, if those have to get removed as he gets out there and starts grading, what procedures do we have to make sure that we provide the proper number of trees if additional specimens come out?
If I may, the plan as it's designed today assumes removal of those trees.
Okay, so they're just not shown here, but it assumes.
That's right. They're on we've got a few labeled here. Again, difficult for you to see, but.
What he's showing is the Xed through ones are being removed, which are the specimen trees in that area.
Okay, I see them now. I'm sorry, I didn't see them earlier.
And those are the ones the recompense complies with in replacing.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Any other comments before we entertain the motion? I will comment. I do see, whether it's R2 or R2 conservation, that this will be not an improvement over a vacant lot, because I would much rather to be a vacant lot than a developed area. But it will be a good transitional area between C2 to the east and this neighborhood, and I think whether it's developed as R2 or R2 conservation, it will be a benefit to the neighborhood. There may be a little bit more traffic, but I think it will help stabilize this neighborhood. Although it's already a stable neighborhood, I think it will even become more so. It'll be buffered from future development and uncertainty of what's going to happen on this lot. And I know Eric Schumacher is a big proponent of neighborhood parks, so this would be an opportunity, if it's conservation, for a neighborhood park if it's developed the right way. Any further comment before we entertain a motion? Do we have anyone can make this motion, because Nancy Diamond is not here. Does someone wish to make a motion? Councilmember Dippolito wishes to make a motion.
I will attempt a motion here. And I just want to comment that I agree with the mayor. I think this is a good transitional use between the C3 and the R2. And I know there's some question about the conservation area and the floodplain and how buildable certain pieces of that are. And unfortunately, we don't have all the answers. But we do know that this conforms to code, and it seems to be a reasonable request given the transitional nature of the property. And I think that Brightwater Homes has done an excellent job on Park East. I think those homes are very well designed and are a good quality product. I think what they will build here will be equally as good. And if they are consistent with the photographs that are shown, which I hope they are, we expect a really good product here that will ultimately be good for the neighborhood. And I think having this conservation area, provided that it is open to the public, the neighborhood gets to use it, I think that could be a nice amenity, not just for this, just for these 14 homes, but for the whole neighborhood in general. So with that, I'd make a motion to approve RZ 201-301-671 with the condition that the conservation area is open to the public, meaning beyond just these 14 homes, but to the public in general, and that HOA covenants will be in place to maintain the conservation area, both from invasive species and maintaining the path. And Mr. Mayor, you had another question about the HOA covenants, and
I think you've covered it.
Did that cover it? That's my motion.
Is there a second?
Mr. Mayor, can we make sure that we add staff's conditions to this also?
That
There's
would be
there's
up to
only two.
Mr. Councilmember
There's only
Dippolito.
two of them, but just make sure that we add staff's conditions
Yes,
to this.
I inadvertently left those off. I meant to add the staff conditions.
Given that you weren't the primary motion maker, you did a
I
great
made him
job.
do
I
it,
appreciate it.
but I'll second his motion.
We have a motion and a second. At this time, I'll entertain comment from council.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Wynn.
I do want to tell Brightwater that y'all did a great job on this, working with the community and the neighbors. I know some neighbors aren't happy with this. I have to go back to what Mr. Maureen said, you know, with the conservation easement, it's not going to make it worse, but it's not going to make it better on the stormwater, but at least it's going to be there. And I really appreciate that you're going to go in, make this more of a natural, native area and get the invasive plants out of there. So I do applaud what you've been doing, and I think it's going to be a great project in that area. So thank you.
Anyone else wish to comment before we take a vote? Councilmember Price.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know this application has been deferred a number of times, and I'm not sure that we see a whole lot of change in it over the years, or over the months of the deferrals, only that maybe we're just being worn down by seeing it repeatedly. I mean, I do see that there's the difference in the road, that it doesn't cut through to Valley Drive, but other than that, and perhaps one less house. I know the very first time that this was presented, my comment was that because of that 1/3 of the total property essentially being non-buildable, and I think I heard the applicant say this evening we'd never try to build in the floodplain. So if that be the case, then I would think that the remainder of the property be built as R2, and certainly as a visible R2 from Valley Drive, which this conservation agreement would not make it to be such. I'm all for a park. I'm all for, you know, a nice walkable area back in there, and certainly it could be achieved just by not building there. Very simple. Also, I understand that the conservation, what are we calling this? Conservation easement subdivision. Conservation subdivision is not going to be in the new UDC, or it's not currently part of the new UDC. If that's the case, I guess, does that mean it's not been working out so well? So for those reasons, I'm not in favor of the site plan as presented, or moving ahead with this being a conservation subdivision. So I'm not for this.
Does anyone else wish to comment? Councilmember Eichelhardt.
See if I can try to make a different comment, but as I've said, I think a lot of that property is just not economically viably developable. So if you took the 14 at an R2, you're not going to actually be able to build that many to start with. So I think we are increasing what could be there. And you know, to say that a secondary conservation area is actually going to be a detention pond, I just think that goes against the intent of the ordinance, as well as most of this. You know, the intent was to try and save land that could otherwise be built on, and this does not really do that. A secondary conservation area really should be that whole west side where we do have numerous specimen trees, which I guarantee you, I'm sorry, and I hope you can save some, but when you put in your plan that you're going to take them all out, I think the hope that those might be saved is folly. And then I think we're also setting ourselves up when it does flood and it takes out the bark, and you're going to have those 14 homeowners that are responsible for putting in a path back for other people around there to use. You're setting yourself up for numerous problems that we will hear about in the future, I guarantee you. So we are just, as with many things, over-densifying what would not be there otherwise for no real reason.
Councilman Orleans, do you wish to comment?
I think the developer has listened to some of the neighbors. He's changed his plans from originally we came in. I think it is looking better. Conservation easement does give us some open space, which is what we're trying to create in the city. The homeowner association will have to take care of it, as they do in other neighborhoods. And changing the street going out to Valley Drive, as some of the residents across the street were hoping to have done, with removing a lot, getting similar number of lots that can be built under an R2. I think it's an improvement, and he's tried to listen to the neighbors, so I'm in favor of it.
Any further discussion before we take a vote? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. That's Councilmember Dippolito, Wynn, and Orleans. All opposed. That's Price and Eaglehart. Passes 3-2. We'll call the next agenda item, Ms. Love. Oh, Nancy Diamond is joining us. We'll leave for her to call the next agenda item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next item is SB 201-303-169. That's 650 Jones Road, Michael Statham, land lot 307. Mr. Townsend is here to tell us about it.
Actually, I'm going to do the two items together because they're two lots right next to each other on Jones Road. They need separate votes and separate motions, but they really represent each other. It's 650 and 690 Jones Road. This is the existing homes on Jones Road. What we're dealing with here is when adopted, the stream buffer requirements really made the properties unbuildable. The blue line represents the stream buffer. The yellow area is the 100-foot undisturbed. The green line is the 150 undisturbed buffer. We're talking about 650 and 690 Jones Road for those locations. One of the questions asked during the legal meeting would be how far is the septic location for the property, or the sewer location for the property. It's over 500 feet to the nearest manhole, and it is across Jones, so it is really unfeasible to think that it would be able to be hooked up. So these pieces of property still will require septic tanks as well as drain fields for them to develop. This is the proposed site plans showing the encroachments and the reduction for the 50-foot buffers down to a 50-foot buffer for the location for future homes in these proposed area. This gives you an understanding of if the buffers were reduced to the required or to the proposed 50-foot undisturbed and the 75-foot impervious setbacks, this is where they would go, and that's how would it allow for the future development for the homes to be removed and future homes to be constructed in the location. This is part of the analysis that was provided dealing with how the stormwater from Jones Road comes under the road from a detention to a pond that is north of Jones Road and then starts the intermittent stream that is behind the pieces of property. Staff has recommended approval with two conditions. If you have any questions from staff.
Does the staff have any questions? I mean, does the council have any questions for staff? Councilmember Diamond.
Are you still on the plane?
Mr. Townsend, we're kind of in a unique position on this one in that our city engineer also has ongoing personal knowledge of this. Can one of you talk about the intermittent stream classification and how that impacts this?
Mayor and Council, I guess Councilwoman Diamond is referring to, I live just downstream of this at 620 Jones Road, and I've personally gone and walked the stream, and I've seen the pink and black flagging that marks the beginning of the intermittent stream, and I concur that that is where it begins. I drive over the stream every day, and I actually, before I came to work here, had Corey Rayburn come out, and he thought it was more an intermittent stream than a perennial. The way our perennial streams on the water resources map are defined are they're a blue line on a quad map. It really has nothing to do with the actual stream, with the drainage basin. It's just we took every blue line on a quad map and made them perennial streams. If you do the stream identification on the stream, it identifies as an intermittent stream, which is more in line with what we call flowing streams on our water resources map. So that's why I made the recommendation that I thought a 50-foot undisturbed and 75-foot impervious setback would be appropriate for this.
Any questions Ms. Varick. Thank you. Is the applicant here? Yes, sir, come forward. Or are these two separate applications, or are we hearing them together?
We're hearing them together, but they are two separate ones, one for each property.
All right, well, we'll hear from each of our applicants.
Michael Statham. We applied, I don't know, we've been speaking with Gene and the city planning guys for the last 2 months approximately, and have spent numerous times back and forth, lots of emails, and really have gotten to the point where we really believe that that asking for the 50-foot, 75-foot buffers is not necessarily generous, but appropriate, given the fact that all along that stream there are other properties that have 25-foot that were grandfathered in from years and years ago. As you see, when these houses were built in the 60s, over time, nothing's really changed in that area. So what's necessary for us wanting to build on this property is because if you know, when we were discussing back and forth with Gene and Micah and the city planning department, is he was like, well, we could probably concede without a variance if you go ahead and push the house forward, because we could do some, you know, buffer averaging. Thank you. I'm not a developer nor a builder, so you'll have to excuse my lack of terminology. But when you push the house towards the front of the road, I grew up here. I'm very familiar with every road in this area. And so coming from Bowen, from Johnson's Ferry, lots of people travel that way that work over in, you know, off of Cobb Parkway or whatever. So this is now a fairly highly trafficked road. And as somebody who has 4 children wanting to push a house 40 feet closer to the road or 30 feet closer to the road from where it sits now, that's just, for me, it would be a reason not to build on this property. Some people, if they were going to build a house that had no children, maybe they wouldn't mind pushing it forward 20 or 30 feet. But from our viewpoint of being able to take this, I don't know, approximate 650 is approximately 1.7 acres, 690 is approximately 1.2 acres, and say, can we keep it in this general area that it currently is, slightly push those, push those buffers back to be able to actually achieve building a house that's good for Roswell and good for our families is what's most important to us. So,
sir.
Sure.
My name is Benjamin Miller. Good evening. Thanks for having us. I do not have the credentials to argue with your staff's recommendations, so I won't. I'll just tell you that I'm a. I've been married. I'll be 15 years in the summer. I have 3 lovely children. I'm a business owner, and I would love to join the Roswell community in one of these lots.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to get a motion before opening up for public comment. Do we have a motion? It's 2 separate? Well, we'll hear one. Do we have a motion on one of them?
Yes, yeah, here we go. And we're doing them, I guess we'll take them one at a time. On 650, I would move to approve this with the 2 conditions placed on it by staff.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Wynn. Is there anyone in the public wish to comment on this motion? Any further discussion or questions by council? All in favor of the motion raise their hands. Passes unanimously.
For item SB 201-303-170-690 Jones Road, Benjamin Miller, Land Lot 307, I would move to approve this with the 2 staff recommended conditions.
Motion by Councilmember Diamond. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Wynn. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Any further discussion by council? All in favor of the motion raise their hands. Passes unanimously.
Next item is final plat 201-303-048, 9050 Nesbit Ferry Road, Nesbit Reserve TPG Development, LLC. Michael A. Smith, Land Lot 835. Mr. Townsend.
This is a final plat proposed for 5 acres on Nesbitt Reserve. The proposed plat is in your backup material for the 19 single-family homes. They have preserved the trees in the common area as proposed. They are put in, all the infrastructure is there. It's recommend approval for the final plat.
Does the council have any questions? Councilmember Dippolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Townsend, has anything changed from the rezoning of this property to what we're looking at on the final plan?
Not to my knowledge.
So it is consistent with the
What was approved
zoning?
What was rezoned, exactly.
I know there was a question at one point about the detention facility in the southwest corner and how the water was going to exit there. I think it currently exits above ground. Is that how that wound up? I can't tell from this plat.
At the time of the rezoning, there was discussions with the adjoining property owner of the applicant was proposing to hook into their drainage pipe, and that negotiation was, or that the condition was kind of left open. If the association to the southeast was agreeable, then they could hook into the pipe. If it was not agreeable, they had to design it to open flow to the property. The association would not accept. They couldn't come, I don't believe they could get enough of their own association to agree to hook with the pipe. So it was left open that way.
So it's just the existing condition?
Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion?
Actually, their covenants required that they get, I think it was a supermajority of the lien holders as well. It was a nightmare. I move to approve the final plat.
Motion to approve by Councilmember Diamond. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Dippolito. Anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Any further discussion by council? All in favor of the motion raise their hands. Passes unanimously.
Next item is approval of a text amendment to Chapter 3 Alcoholic Beverages, Section 3.1.2 and 3.2.5 of the City of Roswell Code of Ordinances, and Article 6, Chapter 6.4 C3 Highway Commercial District of the City of Roswell zoning ordinance to allow for microbreweries. This would be the second reading.
Mr. Davidson, if you'd read the ordinance.
Thank you. This is an ordinance to amend Chapter 3 Alcoholic Beverages of the Code of Ordinances and Article 6, Chapter 6.4 C3 Highway Commercial District of the Roswell zoning ordinance. Now therefore, the mayor and council of the City of Roswell, pursuant to their authority, do hereby adopt the following amendments. Chapter 3 Alcoholic Beverages of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Roswell, Georgia is hereby amended by adding to Article 3.1 in general, Section 3.1.2D definitions, new definitions to read as follows, text of which is incorporated herein by reference. And further, the zoning ordinance of the City of Roswell is hereby amended regarding these uses, the uses permitted in C3 zoning category, Article 6, Office and Commercial Zoning Districts, Chapter 6.4, C3, Highway Commercial Districts, Section 6.4.2, permitted and conditional uses, to provide that microbrewery be added to Table 6.1 as a permitted use in zoning category C3 and not permitted in all other zoning categories. And I've approved this to be the second reading.
Do we have a motion for approval?
Move to approve second reading.
Motion by Councilmember Diamond. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Price. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Any further discussion by council? All in favor of the motion raise their hands. Passes unanimously.
Next item is approval of a resolution to submit the Urban Renewal Plan 1 URP and the Opportunity Zone 1 amendments to the Department of Community Affairs. Alice Wakefield is here.
Thank you. Yes, this is a request to approve the expansion of the urban redevelopment plan and the approval of a resolution to submit to DCA for consideration of the expansion of the original opportunity zone.
Alice, do you have a copy of the current zone and the expanded zone? A map? Might help folks in the audience to understand.
Yes. Yes, sir. I think this is,
That's a little busy. If you could,
It is a
tell
little
us the
busy.
the area of which we're proposing to expand into.
the purple areas are the areas that we're asking for them to consider adding to the opportunity zone for the original opportunity zone. The green represents the original boundaries of the opportunity zone. The pink is a previous expansion that was approved, and the yellow is what is opportunity zone 2 that is pending before DCA. We have not heard back on that.
Thank you. Does the council have any questions? Do we have a motion? Councilmember Dippolito.
Ms. Wakefield, could you explain the colors one more time?
Okay, the green is the original opportunity zone that was approved back in 2010. The pink is an expansion that occurred about a year later. The purple.
So the pink is approved.
Yes, the pink is approved. The only thing that's not approved right now would be the purple and the yellow, or the gold's more color.
So the properties we're adding are the Sproul property and what else?
The Sproul property, Crossville Road property, and Crabapple Road. Then there's Manhattan, the property along Manhattan and on Canton and north of Woodstock, Old Roswell Road, Ramsey property near Bullock Hall, Mimosa and Bullock, and property along Marietta Highway 120. Basically, we worked with Roswell Inc. To identify these properties. They've had several inquiries from those business owners asking that the city consider asking DCA to add them to the opportunity zone.
And the properties don't need to be contiguous?
No, sir, because they are in the urban redevelopment plan. As long as they're in the urban redevelopment plan, that's the reason for the expansion of the plan we can ask.
Well, I'm curious that some of these properties being so far out of the original zone would even qualify, especially the ones all the way to the west. They just seem like they're so far out.
If you remember, with the 2010 census, the census tract that qualified the city expanded, so that gave us a little more leadway to ask for these properties to be added.
Okay. And just to confirm on, I guess it's Old Roswell at that point, where the just south of the Sproul property, is that another?
South of the.
That piece right there, is that?
Yes.
Going
That
in
is.
as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That is, yes, in part of it also. It's purple.
Good, thank you.
Councilmember Eichelhardt.
Thank you. Do they take all or nothing, or can they take pieces based on?
They can take pieces.
Okay, so that's probably
Yes.
good, though, if there are things
Yes,
that
sir.
could have problems, so, okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Do we have a motion?
Move to approve.
Motion by Councilmember Diamond for approval. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Dippolito. Anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Yes, come forward, please. You'll give us your name and address.
Thank you. I am Joyce Pettit. I live at 157 Roswell Commons Way, and I'm just off Mansell. I own a townhome. I've been there over 21 years. I've done significant approval, and I am concerned that this zoning change is going to affect my ability to sell that property. I am also concerned that people have looked at that subdivision and not understood that there is a position in this town for residents who don't pay a whole lot and can't afford to pay a whole lot. I am concerned that the way that this is written, that my taxes will rise to a commercial level and force me out. I don't think that this has been openly discussed to the level it should. Last summer, I made a special trip here to the administration to offer a notarized, as was required, opinion to contradict this and to challenge it. I heard nothing back from anyone, and the first notice that I got was a public decision tonight, and I received this in the mail in today's mail. I understand it was sent out earlier, but in the future, I would suggest you give at least 2 weeks leeway so that people can plan their schedule and respond accordingly. Thank you for your attention.
Before you leave, I first want to thank you for coming tonight. There is no zoning change on your property. This is not a zoning change. This is a application with the state of Georgia to change the taxable status of employment. So this will have no effect on your zoning, this vote, and it, I don't know if it'll, we hope it will create more jobs in Roswell, but whether that causes a rise in your property values, I couldn't tell you.
That's not what my concern was. The fact that I was looking at deflated property value because of being taken over with a commercial endeavor.
This is not changing the zoning of your property in any way.
So it will stay townhome zoning.
Your property, as it's currently zoned, will not be affected by this vote. This vote has to do with the taxable status, not with zoning or land use.
Can you tell me when the issue that I have brought up will come up so that I can attend?
I believe what she's discussing is, the notice she received was the postcard related to the Unified Development Code.
Yes.
What it states tonight is staff is making the publication document available to the public as well as the map. Her concern relates to Roswell Commons is currently identified as mixed use, not townhouses. That's her concern.
It is townhomes.
Townhomes.
It's strictly townhomes.
That's what it is designated today.
Why don't we do this? If you will accompany her outside after this vote, then y'all can clear this up. But again, this vote is not a zoning vote.
All right.
And Brad can sort of answer your questions regarding your specific piece of property.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you for coming down tonight.
Thank you so much.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Do we have a motion? Did we already have a motion? Do we have a motion?
I did, but move to approve.
Motion to approve the expansion of the Opportunity Zone. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Dippolito, motion by Councilmember Diamond. Is there further discussion by council? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Passes unanimously.
Mayor, if I may, I want to follow up on something that Brad said so that we can have it on the record, that the Unified Development Code is officially published today. It is on the website along with the map available for anyone and everyone to review it. It will be there for the 60 days, with the first reading before mayor and council being January the 13th.
When does it go to the planning commission? That's the first public
It goes
hearing.
to the planning commission
Next
for the
week.
third hearing next week.
Next week.
Next week, planning
Next week,
commission.
next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday night.
Thank you. At this time, we'll hear from our liaison to the Transportation Department, Councilmember Betty Price.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First item is approval by the mayor and/or city administrator to sign a contract with Johnson Landscaping for the River to the Square Trail project in the amount of, oh, my eyes are not that good. Is that a 567,182.58, presented by Steve Asenbrack, who's still with us this evening.
Good evening, Councilmember Price, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. We issued a bid, and 9 bids were received on this project, cost ranging from $608,000 to $906,000. After due diligence, we determined that Johnson Landscape was the lowest responsible bidder, an amount of $608,000, with a negotiated price of $567,182.58. The project consists of a half a mile of trail, and I've shown a graphic here which shows State Route 120 moving up to the square. This is State Route 9. North is to the top of this graphic, and Willio Road is here at the bottom of the hill. This project will connect Willio Road with Bullock Hall driveway and go through Bullock Hall to Bullock Drive. It's about a half mile long. It will be 10 to 12 feet of multi-use trail. Due to the higher expected bid prices, some of the alternate items such as lighting, benches, and trash cans were not included in this contract. But we do expect this is a unit price contract, and so based on conditions in the field, we may have the ability to change some of the wall lengths and some of the other pay items so that there still may be some money left over, which we may be able to cover some of those costs in the future. We're very excited about this trail. This will be a much-needed connection between the activities on the riverfront, and we believe that not only will it support the bicycle and pedestrian community, but also add much-needed economic value and vitality to the Mimosa Square area as well as Canton Street.
Does the council have any questions? Councilmember Price.
Thank you. There's a comment in the packet that says that the bid prices were higher than expected. What had you anticipated that this cost could have been?
Well, we have our budget was reinforced concrete. It's going to be that stamped stone look, like what we did on the sidewalk project that we had on Old Roswell Road near Stroud's Printing. It's not the old style plain concrete wall. It's basically just a form that is put on the wet concrete to provide a stacked stone appearance. Right. And we've negotiated to also have that to be colored. We're working with Bullock Hall to have that admixture included in there to make sure that it fits in with it's context sensitive and it fits in with the historic area.
Two things. I like that approach, and I think that worked out pretty well in the past. A couple things that we can tweak, I think, to make it a little bit better is to soften some of the angles. I think typically we do kind of pointed angles.
I know exactly.
And it just doesn't flow right. So I think kind of soften those and make them curves.
The edges won't be quite as pointed you're talking about.
Yeah, because when we change direction, it just looks awkward. And the other thing, the top usually gets forgotten about. We get the sides looking great with the stone look, and then there's just kind of concrete on the top. So
we try to put, I don't know if you've been to the lower Roswell Road, what Cobb County's doing. That's exactly what they're doing, and I don't like it at all. They basically just put the form up there, take the form down, and then you get whatever it looks like. So if you get a half a stone or whatever, it looks unfinished. Ours has sort of a lintel, a cap that goes across it. If you've noticed, it's you know, a nod towards having a more finished top appearance, but I will make sure that the final troweling of the concrete is done in a way that sort of softens those edges and provides it a balanced look.
Yeah, it's a minor point, but I think it makes a big difference.
I agree with you completely.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Do we have a motion?
Yes. Move to approve signing the contract with Johnson Landscaping in the amount of $567,182.68.
Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Dippolito, motion by Councilmember Price. Does anyone in the audience wish to comment? Come forward, please. Give us your name and address.
Good evening. I know you don't want to hear me, but that's the way a mop flops. Of course, I'm glad to see something going on 120. My big concerns are $500,000 for a half a mile of road. Wow. I think linear sidewalks are about $20 a linear foot. I don't know where that came from. A couple of concerns. You know where I live, and I've tried walking down Highway 9 and gone to the river and walked along the river and then walked up Willio and then tried to walk down 120 back to my house. Fortunately, I had signed my will and gotten good insurance before I left because it is a death trap. Is this only on one side of the road?
Yes.
Great. People do walk on both sides of the road. I know it's a southern thing about having sidewalks only on one side of the road, but this is a 6-lane divided highway. What are you thinking if you think this really connects people from the river to the square? That is a misnomer. It is a nice, warm, cozy, fuzzy thing, but it isn't going to work. You've got a bike path. I'm well aware of it on Willio. But and you've got some sidewalks there. You've got a couple churches and a school. Who do you think is going to cross a 6-lane highway to get to the other side to use this so they can walk to Bullock Hall? You, Mayor Wood? Will you take your children and your grandchildren when you do that? Because that's who you want to use it. Now, you may ride your bike there, but not everyone is a hammerhead with spandex. There are people that like to walk, and they walk with children and they stroll. And the other thing is, just up the street on 120, you have the Just People Village, which should have never been built there because those people have access to nothing, no transit or anything. It should have been built downtown Roswell where they could walk places. They are not going to be able, even though they do sometimes ride at the river, because I was instrumental in getting them in the mayor's ride the first year. They are not going to cross that 120. There's no crossing lights. There's no crosswalks. Why didn't you spend the money and put a sidewalk on both sides of 120? In deference to the people that live where I live, who have no interest in walking to Canton Street. If I hear Canton Street one more time as a driving thing in this town, I'm going to scream. There's more to this town than Canton Street. It's 48 square miles. Canton Street is a half a mile. Get over it, people. Please get over Canton Street, because the people that live here, who've lived here a long time, are well over it. This should be on both sides of the street. $500,000 for a half a mile is way too excessive, and I can guarantee you no one's going to use it. If you don't believe me, meet me at my house and I'll walk with you and I'll pay you and I'll make you coffee. I haven't been wrong yet. I'm nearing the end of my life in this town. I'm tired of waiting for you people to accept the fact that about 5,000 people live in a quadrant. We're not invisible. And no one up there, not any of you, care about us, and you're totally indifferent to our needs. You have all these pie-in-the-sky ideas, and they're not practical. So don't call it the River to the Square project. It's not.
Would anyone else wish to speak? Is there any further discussion by council? All in favor of the motion, raise their hands. Pass it. It's 4.
No,
that's unanimous. If you'll call the next agenda item.
Next agenda item is approval for the mayor and/or city administrator to sign a contract with Northwest Georgia Paving Incorporated for road resurfacing in the amount of $1,508,720.50. And before we go on, I just want to make a comment that I gave the wrong number in the previous item, and I just want to make sure that was corrected. it was 58 cents. Mr. Eisenbracht.
Thank you, Councilmember Price. Yes, we had, we issued 3 separate bids. This time was a little bit complicated because we wanted to make sure that each of these items came in separately. So we issued 3 separate bids, 13-282C, 283C, and 284C. We had 7 bids, and you could see by the bid tab that we had individual bids on each of these 3 items. Just by kind of coincidence, Northwest Georgia Paving was the lowest responsible bidder for each of the 3 line items, with a total amount of $1,508,720.50. So graphically, within the city of Roswell, we are going to pave this is a combination of milling, patching, resurfacing, and restriping for Nesbitt Ferry Road, section of Norcross from the roundabout to Canton Street, Woodstock Road from Canton Street up to what is also Woodstock Road, the end of 92, and also Hembry Road from Elkins over to Crabapple, including taking out part in the center for the future roundabout at House Hembry.
Does the council have any questions? Councilmember Wynn.
Mr. Eisenbracht.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm so glad to see Nesbitt Ferry on this. Thank you very much. But are we going to, because I see the break over there in Hembry, and I understand how come there's that break. I'm assuming that there's also going to be a break in Nesbitt Ferry from below?
I sent an email to Johns Creek, and I have not heard back about their intentions, so made it known to them that they were going to be paving Nesbitt Ferry. I would prefer if they were going to discuss from below that we do now. It would be very easy for us at any time to subtract out the limits of their project so that we don't have to mill it out and redo it, but I mean...
So you haven't heard anything?
Have not heard anything.
I'd call Mayor Bodker, but I don't want to get him in any trouble.
How about...
I mean, it's not the end of the world.
I want to just make sure that, you know, I hate for us to pay the money to have that section done and then it comes up and gets torn back up again. So if you just can, you know, due diligence and make sure that you can at least get some type of answer from them, I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Caleb.
Councilmember Wynn, I'll reach out to my counterpart in Johns Creek and see if we can't connect those dots with opening up the conversation between transportation staff.
Okay. I appreciate it. Thanks, Ms. Love.
Steve, I support that. We had talked about it, Nesbitt Lakes, seeing if there's anything we could do to help them
Yes,
with
sir.
their access issue. Have
We
you
will
looked at
we
that?
will look at that in the course of doing this paving, Mr.
you.
Mayor.
Any further discussion? Councilmember Dippolito.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize, I missed the Transportation Committee meeting where this was discussed, or I would have brought it up sooner. We had talked a while ago about the area in front of Roswell North Elementary. They've got a section that is currently striped. It used to be parallel parking, I believe, on
Right.
Woodstock Road, which is hard to fathom the way it is now. But they would love for that paved area to become a landscape area because there's no landscaping in front of the school right now. You know, I'm sure we can't decide that tonight, but is there a way to look at that where we could run the curb line further out, not do as much paving, and come up with a solution for putting in some trees, or, you know, whether that's shared with Fulton County Schools, but I'd like to start planning for that now, so
Sure.
that's an eventuality, rather than paving that area and then coming and tearing it up.
Well, at the very least, we could probably mill part of it and then just not resurface in a certain limits, and then go back there later on and leave that area available for some future landscaping. We had talked about it at one time. I was concerned a little bit about the drainage, some curb lines. Working with Public Works, we might be able to do some low impact development. The issue was that we originally had a budget, I want to say, of $28,000 to do that right. We don't necessarily have to commit to that now, but I can certainly make a note to you know, sort of section off a section of that pavement, not basically pave over it, and we don't have to make it any worse than it is right now. We don't necessarily have to obligate ourselves to do that now, but we can work with the school, talk about the limits of their area, and see if we can work something out.
Yeah, what they would be very interested in doing, they're a very science-oriented school, so they would love to be able to watch as this occurs and help figure out or understand how something like a bioretention area or whatever would need to be for that stormwater, how all that would work, and help it be a learning experience for the kids, and somehow make this a tool for them understanding the process a little bit. I think that could be a great way for us to work with them. But I did want to bring it up, and I'm not quite sure how to do that at this point, as far as getting council approval to at least look into that and see if there's an opportunity there as far as reworking that and landscaping that area, because right now it's a striped area that's never used for anything.
Right.
It makes it more difficult for the kids to get across the street because it just adds a lane for them to have to walk across, and that's a heavily utilized crosswalk area. So to the extent we could do something, that would be great.
The city does have money available to plant trees. It won't do all the landscaping, but we do have a tree planting program which might assist them.
That'd be great.
We can add that into the scope of the project.
You've helped plant trees before. I've seen you.
Absolutely. At schools, too.
Do we have a motion?
No.
We have a question. Councilmember Price.
Yeah, I'm just curious why that was hatched over in the first place. It used to be parallel parking, which was wonderful because it was close to the school. It allowed the families to park there. Now they park on my street and completely make it impossible to pass because they park on both sides. And it's a huge safety hazard. And they're parking now, 100, 150 yards away from the school, whereas before that was parallel parking. People could park there, walk into the school quickly. They were there, they were out. I'm not sure why the parallel parking was taken away.
I don't remember that either. I don't remember the justification.
I'm all for the trees too. It'd be lovely to have a beautiful thing to exit my subdivision and look at. On the other hand, I think the real practical dilemma there is the lack of parking to access the school, and that they're using the neighborhood street, making it a very unsafe situation.
I think it's a great question to address to the school board.
I believe the school actually asked us to eliminate that parallel parking for some reason. There might have been some safety concerns with Woodstock.
I don't know if the speed limit made it prohibitive to have parallel parking there or not.
There was something that I'm sure we didn't do that on our own. I'm sure we were asked to make those changes, and I think that's what then generated the concept that if that area was not going to be used for anything, that could it be, say, reverted back into some kind of a natural state. And we have looked at that several times. Now I'll have to make a balance between I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the people that turn down into Stillwater Shade and just park on the really close to the intersection there.
On both sides of the street.
Yeah.
The only one car can pass. And I don't know what led to the taking away the parallel parking.
I can research that.
Because if it were up to me, my choice would be bring the parallel parking back, and if they, for whatever reason, whoever's making that determination that it can't be parallel parking, then I think it would be wise to move ahead with utilizing that area instead of just a crosshatch to, have it something more attractive and possibly even useful and educational.
Councilmember Orleans.
Actually, not on regular school days, but on busy times and weekends, people still use that to park there along those stripes.
Do they? Even in the Gore area? Hadn't noticed that, but okay.
Have we gotten a motion yet?
No, we're working on
Do we have a motion?
My other comment was, regarding the Nesbitt Ferry, because of the Brumbelow issue, that it's sort of been unresolved with the ball in the court of Johns Creek, and that, I asked that there be communication to them. I think we do need to make it more than just an email. Emails get buried, we all know that. So I think a real letter or serious communication of our intentions, so that if they want to respond on the other issue, that they can do that in a timely fashion. Otherwise, move to approve the signing of a contract with Northwest Georgia Paving for road resurfacing in the areas that we were shown in the amount of $1,508,720.50.
Motion by Councilmember Price. Is there a second? Yes.
Councilmember Price, would you be willing to look into the area that we discussed in front of Roswell North Elementary?
It sounds like we've at least loosely given Steve some direction, but if you think we need to put it in the form of the motion, we can do that as well.
I'm comfortable that we've got flexibility in the contracting process, and I certainly have your intent.
Okay, that's all I need. Thank you.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? Second by Councilmember Dippolito. Anyone in the audience have any questions or comments? Any further discussion by council? All in favor of the motion? Passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Do we have a motion for closure? Personnel and real estate. Motion second. Do we have a second? All in favor, raise your hands. We have enough votes to get us there. We're adjourned. Oh, thank you so much. Right there? No.